Well, yes, we're turning our attention to elections, looking ahead of Kogi and Bayelsa elections, preparations for those two elections. We've got Mr. Innocent, I beg your pardon, Festus Okoye here with us. He's the National Commissioner and Chairman of Information and Voter Education Committee of INEC. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, you know, when people hear that, wait a minute, there could be propensity for violence in election, because you read, I think, the rec in Kogi make reference to that, and we thought, oh dear, not again. We thought that by now we should have put measures in place such that this doesn't happen, because I know that you normally have consultations and meetings with different agencies, security, political parties, stakeholders about elections. Why is this fear now about violence in Kogi elections?
Well, I think that the fear is accentuated by history and experience. Both Kogi and Bayelsa have had a history of electoral violence. Because of that, people also anticipate that this time around there may likely be violence. I just came back from Kogi yesterday, and because of this, we have started preparations early enough. We had meetings with traditional rulers on Tuesday in Kogi, and as of today, our Electoral Institute are training security officers on election security. So we are meeting with different stakeholders in Kogi and Bayelsa, at least to make the point clear that this election must and should be devoid of any form of violence.
Is there any reference to the primaries in each of these states as well? Because there were also suggestions of some sort of violence there.
Yeah, well, if you look at the history of primaries and the type of violence that attends primaries of different political parties, you will see that both in Kogi and in Bayelsa, despite the fact that we had skirmishes here and there, the level of violence people anticipated was not what we had. And I think that that is the way it should be. We need to begin to build confidence on the people that this time around, that they can go to the polling units to cast their votes without any form of intimidation or any form of violence. So I'm anticipating that both the traditional rulers, civil society groups and organizations, the political parties themselves, and the security agencies should be on top of this situation to make sure that we don't experience any unwholesome activities during this particular period.
What kind of feedback or response did you get from them? Because we're also reading that some say, no, this group don't have a monopoly of violence. And when you hear that kind of narrative, it raises more concerns.
Well, we are holding consultation under the Interagency Consultative Committee on Election Security with the different security agencies. You know that the topography of these two and the geography of these two states are completely different. Bayelsa is mostly riverine, and then you know the geography of Kogi State. So we are looking at all the variables. For Bayelsa, we are collaborating with the Navy for purposes of protecting election materials and election personnel. And then in Kogi State, we had meeting with the traditional rulers, and with the Commissioner of Police was there. And what they're saying is that with effective education, with effective voter education, and with proper mobilization and deployment, that everything will play itself out well.
And how well is that going at the moment?
Well, it's going on well. As of today, we have mapped out an elaborate program of voter education. And as you are aware, we are still distributing uncollected PVCs. And we redesigned the template for collection. We are going to the various communities, cascading the thing, even to the polling units, and finding the people where they are. We are calling them up on telephone, and sending SMS to those who have not collected. So the response has been very, very good. And then in terms of voter education, we have designed jingles that will be played on radio and television, and we are going to have what we call door-to-door sensitization program. And we're also going to the various campuses to make sure that we carry everybody along. Our emphasis is that in this election, no voter who has registered to vote will be left behind.
Is INEC still under pressure to sell permanent voter cards?
Well, the total number of permanent voters cards available for collection is not that much. For Bayelsa, it is 49,291. And for Kogi, it's 170,644. And the owners of these voters cards are known. And we have taken these cards to the various communities. So we have not had any adverse report relating to some of these voters cards.
I know, because I mean, we understand from one of your officials that
Yes.
some politicians were pressuring them to buy the voter cards.
Well, I've not gotten that particular report. Maybe it was before, but I don't think in relation to this particular period, we've not gotten that report. And I just came back from Kogi yesterday.
Okay. One of the issues you also had to deal with in the previous election is that of vote buying.
Yes.
We also understand that you had some technology you wanted to dispense to check vote buying.
Well, we have tried all sorts of things to check the issue of vote buying. We reconfigured the polling units to make sure that the votes of the people are not displayed anyhow, to ensure some level of secrecy. We also banned the use of photographic equipment inside the principles of the polling unit itself or the voting cubicle. And we've tried all sorts of things. But by and by, ultimately and fundamentally, the whole issue about vote buying resides with the political parties and the candidates and the security agencies. We can only protect the principles of the polling units by collaborating with the security agencies. But I think that the whole campaign against vote buying and selling should be directed at political parties.
You know, some of those issues have to do with the integrity of the ballot.
Yes.
Which you spoke about. But given our claim here, is there a template or standard of measurement? Because the polling units vary from one location to the other.
Yes.
So what is the minimum requirement for electoral officers so that if where the officials will be is one spot and where the ballot, where you go and thumbprint the cubicle,
yes,
after which you then come in and drop your paper? Because we saw that in the last elections,
yes,
it was a little challenging.
Yeah, it's challenging, and it will continue to be a challenge because some of our polling units are located in schools. Some of them are located in other public facilities. So it's not uniform. The polling units that are located in schools is easier to guarantee some level of secrecy for those who are voting, while those that are located in open spaces, it's only through the cooperation of the security agencies that you can guarantee some level of secrecy. But we have been training our officials on how to position the voting cubicle so that we can guarantee some level of secrecy. So it's still a challenge, but we are working on it.
And yeah.
Go on.
Okay, because when you say, because you look at the political parties, how they conduct themselves in these elections, and then security agencies too, this is a very, very crucial part on their part, because how do you deal with that kind of scenario if a security official is supposed to do something about this thing and it looks the other way?
Yes. Well, what we have tried to do and what we are doing presently is, one, to train the security officials on election security issues. Let them understand the architecture of deployment. Two, let them understand what an electoral offense is, and also to get them to act professionally and ethically on election day. There's a difference between somebody who does not know and somebody who is acting out of knowledge and yet decides to do the wrong thing. So the training we are having now is slightly more intense. We are training senior police officers, immigration, and other services so that they can also cascade some of these trainings to the lower cadres of the security officers that are going to work during this particular election. And from the response we've been getting and from the evaluation we are doing, it seems the trainings are going on well, and we don't envisage serious challenges.
Take us through the process this time around, because yes, what we were made to understand prior to the previous general elections, yes, is that it's the fellow in charge, the INEC official at the polling booth, yes, or the polling area, yes, that is in charge of everything, and he'll be able to call on the security officials when and where necessary, and all, yes, of that. Is that what is still subsistent? Take us through what the process is this time around, especially in the light of this training you're talking about.
Look, on election day, the presiding officer is the managing director of the polling unit. the presiding officer, that principles of the polling unit is sovereign. And the person who is in total control of everything on election day is the presiding officer. It is the presiding officer that can make a determination that somebody should be taken out of the polling unit or the polling area, and can call on a police officer and say, look, this person has become unruly, this person is trying to obstruct or disrupt the voting process, take this person out. And it is incumbent on the security officer who has been posted to the place to comply with the directives of the presiding officer.
In other words, that police officer or security official answers to this presiding officer.
On election day, yes.
Okay, how about the others who are on the periphery of the election, the polling area?
The presiding officer is in charge of the entire polling area. So, and everybody on election day is answerable to the presiding officer, who is the managing director of the polling unit on election day. So everybody answers to the presiding officer on election day.
Okay, I thought you was going to use the word lead agency, because they like to ask about lead agencies here now. Well, let's go to Lagos. Kaide has some questions. Kaide, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Chamberlain. Now, I'd like to dwell on security generally, because this is a major factor. If you take out security from elections, then you can imagine what we would have. And I remember after that February 23rd presidential and National Assembly elections, I think you were saying that, a lot of your officials had issues with threats, harassment, intimidation, assault, abduction, and even rape. And that's in spite of, assurances that were given by security agencies that your officials and voters will be protected. So for these coming elections in Kogi and Bayelsa, what will be different?
Now, this is off-season election. And because we just have 2 elections, we are not leaving anything to chance. Now, we are going to have, for a place like Kogi State, we are going to have not less than 7 resident electoral commissioners, either taking charge of one local government or a cluster of local governments. And we're also going to have national commissioners manning maybe a senatorial zone. And then the same thing we go for a place like Bayelsa. So we are going to make sure that we move into these 2 states and make sure that nothing goes wrong. We are not going to allow any political party or any political thug or anybody who has no business at any of the collation centers to take over our collation centers, overwhelm our collation officers and returning officers, and do anything unwholesome untoward. We've made it very clear to the security agencies, and they have promised to secure both our materials and our officials at the collation centers and also at the polling units. So we are discussing with the Interagency Consultative Committee on election security, both at the national level, at the state level, and at the local government level. And we are going to make sure that the deployment we are going to do this time around will be very, very effective, and we are going to cover all the flashpoints. So the cooperation of the security agencies is very, very key, and they are on top of the situation. And we are happy with the cooperation we are getting so far.
I would also like to ask, so far, we had reports of arrests that were made, especially people that, caused violence around the polling units across the country. So far, how is the litigation process going, especially because we know that, punitive measures are important, especially for those that violate, electoral laws. So how far have you gone in, prosecuting some of these cases?
Well, that's part of the challenge in Nigeria. And that is why the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission has made it very, very clear that what Nigeria needs at this point in time to break this cycle of electoral impunity is an Electoral Offences Commission and Tribunal that will be solely in charge of arrest, investigation, and prosecution of electoral offenders. As of today, on election day, the police will make the arrest. They will carry out the investigation before the file gets to the Independent National Electoral Commission for purposes of prosecution. And we have said that some of these electoral offenders are also our officials of the Independent National Electoral Commission, and that we do not want to get into the whole ethical issue of whether we have the right and the presence of mind to prosecute some of our officials. So the issue now is that I know arrests have been made, investigations have been carried out. Our legal department are liaising with the legal department of the Nigerian Police Force in terms of charging some of these electoral offenders to court. But it is really, really complicated because some of the people were arrested on the spot by officers who came from a different state to do election duty in a different state. Then they have carried out investigation. To get some of these officials to court to come and testify is also a very huge challenge. But we are working on it, and our legal department has been liaising with the Nigerian police force in terms of making sure that all these people who have been arrested are charged to court.
You know, speaking of courts, I'm sure you remember that over 700 petitions were filed, against the past election we had in the country. It makes it perhaps one of the most contested election process in the country. And, looking forward now, we're looking at a case where we don't see as much, petitions coming up, especially because, it casts a shadow on the credibility of the election. So moving forward also for this, what areas are you planning to, plug those loopholes that end up in us having these amounts of petitions?
As a lawyer, I don't think that we should be afraid of people going to court to go and put forward their grievances. I don't agree in relation to the comparisons that are being made in relation to election petitions. For the 2019 elections, we had more pre-election matters involving political party nominations than we had election petitions. So it doesn't follow. And some of these petitions that were filed are also revolves around the issue of qualification. So there are some pre-election matters that are also election matters, like the issue of whether a candidate is qualified or not. So I really do not see any big challenge in relation to the number of petitions that have been filed.
You did release a statement about some candidates who will likely be disqualified. And when they hear that, when politicians hear you want to disqualify them, they raise and say, whoa, what's going on here? Could you shed some light on that?
Look, the law and the Constitution is very, very clear. I believe fervently and earnestly that every political party that has been registered to operate as a political party in Nigeria should know the qualification for contesting every office in the country. They should know, for you to be qualified to contest the election for the post of president, they should know governors, senatorial elections, House of Representatives, and House of Assembly elections. So I think it does not tell well of our political parties, and it does not tell well of the level of our organization that for governorship elections, every political party ought to know that for you to field a candidate for governorship election, that candidate must be at least 35 years old. So for a political party to go and field a candidate or nominate a candidate that is 27 years old for the position of governor tells you that that political party has not paid attention to the provisions of the Constitution or has not even seen a Constitution in the first place. Now, the truth of the matter is that nominations have closed. So, if you have nominated a candidate that is 27 years old to the Independent National Electoral Commission, the implication is that you don't have a candidate in this election. So it is not the issue of whether INEC wants to disqualify anybody or not. You don't have a candidate in the election.
Okay. When are you publishing the list of these candidates? So that those who had lost out, they will know by today? Is it today?
No, we have published the list.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
That must have been the wrong.
Yes. We've published what we call the personal particulars of all the candidates in the election. 52 for Bayelsa and 49 for Kogi State. So the list is displayed in front of the INEC office.
So why are some people still asking for substitution?
No, the law gives them up to the 23rd of September to substitute candidates. But the law is very, very specific. You can only substitute candidates that have been nominated on two grounds. One, validly nominated. If the candidate dies, the candidate that has been validly nominated, or if the person who has been nominated on his own or her own, in his or her own handwriting, through a letter delivered by himself or herself to the political party that nominated the person, saying, I'm no longer interested in running for this particular position. In that instance, the political party can carry out that substitution. So these are the only two grounds on which you can substitute.
And the law, of course, still doesn't permit electronic voting or transmission of votes.
No, the law, as of today, says that everything we are doing must be manual. That's the law.
So the way it works now is what? They're still going to be accredited with the
smart card reader.
Smart card reader, but the voting will be done manually.
Exactly, and the collation will also be done manually.
And many people are hoping that electronic voting and with the whole gamut, going digital would help check many of the issues that you have raised. How soon is that being expected?
Well, we agree, but there are a lot of issues that have to be dealt with before
instance?
we can go electronic voting. One, the legal framework has to be understood and dealt with. Secondly, there are also a lot of blind spots in the country, and we need to deal with that. Before, we thought that the blind spots we had was just 10% of the country, but when we tried to do some pilots, we found out that it's up to 30% of the blind spots where none of the networks covers. So there are a lot of issues that we need to deal with before we can go fully digital. But I believe that what we want for Nigeria as of today will be for us to find a duality between going full electronic and also doing some manual backup so that if one fails, we can have a backup rather than failing both ways.
Won't that be also contested, in court if you have electronic and then, manual?
Oh, well, it can be contested, but the issue is what does the law provide? If the law gives us the power and the permission and the authority and the mandate to have a duality, there won't be any problem with that.
All right, so there you go. All right, that's where I know we'll have to go at this point in time. Thank you very much indeed for coming on today. And we wish you all the best with those politicians trying to sort themselves out. Well, that's the show. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. I'm Chamberlain Uso.
I'm Ayo Makine. Have a wonderful day.
And I'm Kayode Okikelu. Thank you for watching.